All right, well, let's go ahead, open up our Bibles to the book of Judges, chapter 13. Judges 13. Fred's setting a new pattern for the church to try to get people to move from one side to the other. Then the church is going to be shifting this way. All right. Last week we continued looking at the period of the Judges and the account of God using Gideon to provide relief from the Midianites who were oppressing Israel. If you remember, there were 30,000 volunteers that came to fight the battle against the Midianites, and God whittled it down to how many? 300 soldiers. And why did God decide to use such a small army against such a big, massive army? So that they would give God the glory for the victory. Yep. So today we're going to look at another famous judge, and this judge is Samson. How many judges were there? Anybody know how many judges there were altogether? It's 14 judges altogether, and they have a period of about 367-year time frame that they actually ruled. Samson is one of the last of the judges. I'll give them to you so you can hear them. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, and Samuel. So that's an interesting way that is. And by the way, we don't think of Samuel being a judge, do we? We think of him just being a prophet, but he acted as Israel's leader and deliverer, which was exactly what the judges were doing. And so did Eli for a time. And you remember Eli, he ended up being his own weight. Fell under his own weight, broke his own back, broke his own neck, I guess. But it was a divine judgment as well, because God was angry with that. And we'll probably look at that. Let's see what we got on here. We're going to deal with, we'll deal with Samuel here coming up in a couple weeks on that. So, yep. All right. Actually fell over backwards when he learned that the ark had been taken. That's what shocked him. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into, we're going to look at Samson, and I'm going to just tell you ahead of time, if you don't already know this about Samson, he's not got a lot of clean things to say about him, a lot of nice things to say about him. Even though he's one of the most amazing judges, I would say, in the Bible, one of the most amazing leaders that God uses, you would almost have to stand back and go, I don't know why God would use a man like this. So open up to Judges 13, and we're going to read really what leads up to Samson coming into the world, and this is between Samson's parents and an angel of the Lord, which we'll find out the angel of the Lord is God himself, right? So we'll find that out as we work our way through it. All right, so let's get some readers. We'll divide it up. 1 to 5, Bill. 6 to 10, Wayne. 11 to 15, Darla. 16 to 20, Shy. 21 to 25, Fred. I looked over there a couple times. Judges 13. Yep.
And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. And there was a certain man of the family of the Canaanites, his name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold, now thou art barren and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son,
Frederick. 21. Eshtal. Okay, let's work through here. What were the instructions for the child in verse 5 that you're not supposed to do for this child, or not give this child, or have done to this child? Never cut his hair with, and why? And there's some others obviously that are fit in there as well. Yeah, no strong drink. What is a Nazirite? Anybody know what a Nazirite is? Anybody got one of those cross-references Bibles that tell you where the mention of Nazirites are? We can kind of look at that. No. Anybody got a cross-reference Bible that tells you a cross-reference in this passage of what a Nazirite is? Anybody? Number 6, good. Look at number 6, and it's going to be 2 through 8. So look at number 6, 2 through 8. Who wants to read that? Somebody? Melissa? Okay, go ahead. All right, so we get this kind of terminology used over and over about the Nazirite. It's someone who's to be separated. Separated. And there's some prescriptions given for what they are to do. One, in that time, while they choose to be a Nazirite, or while they're going through the Nazirite vow, they don't shave their head. Actually, the way that starts is they shave their head, and then through that process, they don't. So however how long that process goes, they keep it growing until they're ready. Then when they're done with that, let me just kind of give you an example of what would happen. When they're done with that Nazirite vow, they would shave it again, and then they would take that hair, burn it on the offering on an altar to show that this was their time that they spent and offered to the Lord of being separated. They weren't supposed to have anything to do with the grape in any way, right? Can't drink it when it's in liquid form. Can't eat it when it's on the vine. Can't eat it when it's dried. And then it even said even more, you can't even do any of the kind of things that have to do with any kind of drink that would come from that plant in any way, okay? Then the last one, can't touch anything that's dead. Can't touch anything that's dead because you will be considered unclean. He said even in the time of your separation, if your mom or your dad or your sister or your brother die, you cannot go to their funeral and be made unclean. Or at least if you do, you have to be at a very far distance. I don't know how close they were allowed to be, in their I'm not supposed to touch part. But yeah, there's a social distancing from the dead, right? So, but when you see the Nazirite vow mentioned there in number 6, it's a voluntary vow for a time. It's very rare that you see a lifelong Nazirite vow. In fact, and again, the lifelong Nazirite vow is not because they chose to from their birth to do so. It was because it was by God. There's only one other one that I can think of that sounds like him, but it doesn't actually directly say he's a Nazirite from birth. Anybody know who that is? John the Baptist, yeah. He's the only other one that it appears to have had the same kind of a vow given upon him as well, even though it doesn't directly say it. So that's an interesting thing here that we have. So you think this man is going to be a holy man. I mean, that's what he's being set apart. That's what it said he would be, holy unto the Lord. He's supposed to be a holy man. But you look at the life of Samson, he's anything but. All the way through. And he continually keeps breaking the vow over and over and over, as you will see. Okay? All right, so let's look at this person here that comes to the wife of Manoah. What does she call him? No, she doesn't see him as that. Not yet. Neither does Manoah. What do they refer to him as? Look at verse 6. The woman came to her husband, saying, "A man of God came unto me." They think this is a person. Now, she does specifically say his countenance was like that of an angel, but she still is deeming him as a man, like a prophet. And so does Manoah have that kind of an attitude about this man that he thinks, this person that he thinks is a man of God, a prophet. What does Manoah want to do to honor the man of God while he's there in the presence? Yeah, he wants to kill a goat, prepare a meal, offer it to him. And again, it's still, verse 16, look at what it says. It still makes it pretty clear that he did not know this was the Lord. It says, "And the angel of the Lord said unto Manoah, Though thou detain me, I will not eat of thy bread. And if thou wilt offer a burnt offering, thou must offer it unto the Lord. For Manoah knew not that he was an angel of the Lord." He didn't know who he was. Then at one point, Manoah asked him for his name, and what is his response? He says, "Why would I tell you my name? It's a secret." It's like, because I don't know your name. I think it's kind of funny. But it does give us a bit of more credibility for why he doesn't give the name. Because he is the Lord. And this is things you would almost kind of connect the dots that, my name's holy. I'm not going to let you just have it and do whatever you want with my name. And at the same time, he's meaning to be somewhat secretive anyways from Manoah and his wife. So, yeah, he didn't ask him again. So he's told him, you're going to have this child. He's going to be a Nazirite from his birth. Your mama, the wife, she's supposed to basically take on that vow herself while she's in the process of bearing this child. And then the last thing, he decides to offer a sacrifice unto the Lord in the presence of this man of God. And what does the man of God do? Yeah, he just kind of walks into it and is taken out. And at that point, they all realized what? We haven't been talking to a man. We've been talking to God. And then Manoah says, we're going to die. We've been standing there talking to God face to face and didn't even know it. And his wife kind of answered in wisdom. She said, yeah, but he said we're going to have a child. That won't work. If we're going to die, there's no child going to come. Sort of like, maybe you need to put two and two together. He said you're going to Yeah. So then it mentions Samson's birth in verse 24 and 25. And look at how it's described of God being involved in his life there. Child grew, the Lord blessed him. And look at that, verse 25. The Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times. That's one thing you're going to see continually through the life of Samson is the Spirit of the Lord's coming upon him and moving him and moving him. Something that some of you see in the Old Testament all the way through where it says the Lord comes upon him or the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. You see that happening with Saul, the first king. You see it happening with David. You see it happening with different prophets and different people. And here specifically you see it happening. And so when you see the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him, it's sort of a way of saying God is just setting him apart to do what he wants to do and working through him specifically. And the Spirit of the Lord would depart from times. Even as we will see here in this context with Samson, the Spirit of the Lord will leave. It's not the same as what we are in the condition. We have the Spirit of the Lord and he's never leaving. He lives in us. He moves in us. He works in us. And the Bible says we are sealed with the Spirit of God. We are sealed unto the day of redemption. We can't lose him. And if we do lose him, we don't have Christ. I mean, that's what it's saying. We don't have our salvation in Christ. You can't lose him. But in this case, the way God worked, it's not that he wasn't saving people, but it's a different situation. He'd come upon and he'd work and he'd move. And then when he was done dealing with them, he would leave. In fact, that's why David at one point said, "Don't let your spirit depart from me." Because it wasn't that he was saying, "Don't let me lose my salvation," but what he was saying is, "I don't want to stop being used. I want to stop being used of God." Okay, does that make sense? All right. So now we come to chapter 14. We're just going to really kind of stay close together. I mean, we'll skip a few verses here and there, but we're going to come to chapter 14, and we're going to look at some select passages where we see Samson's life and the victories over the Philistines that he continually keeps having, but they are odd ways in which he has them. These are God working in strange ways through a very carnal, fleshly man. That God works through this man this way. All right, so chapter 14, verse 1 to 7. Let's get one reader. Okay, go ahead. Read it first, Bill. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this account here. Who does Samson want to marry? The text starts off telling us. Who does he want to marry? A Philistine woman. What's wrong with that? The Philistines are the ones controlling them. Yeah, they're under that bondage right now. By the way, Philistines were one of the original Canaanite families. You remember that? The ones that were supposed to be driven out by the Israelites. Remember what God said about that? Don't have anything to do with them. You're actually supposed to remove them out of the land, but now they're holding you in bondage. And so he sees this Philistine woman, and he wants to marry her. And he goes to mom and dad and says, "I need you to get her for me, for she pleaseth me well." Now, what does that mean? She's beautiful. She's real good looking. So he's not necessarily making his choices based on godly principles only. Would you agree? Yeah. So she pleases me well, he says. What's God's plan in this marriage? It mentions it. To seek an occasion against the Philistines. So God is going to work through this carnal, unholy Nazarite, which is a contradiction in terms, to seek an occasion against the Philistines to go after them. And he's going to use this guy to do it in his unholy desire. What does that tell you that God can do? He is not limited by anything in how he wants to work. Right? I mean, if he wants to work through a bad person, through a sinful person, through a selfish person, he can do it. We sometimes just think he's only limited to really holy people and godly people and people who are really walking close with God, and that's the only people he works with. That's a lie. He works through all sorts of people and does his will through them all. I'll just tell you this, though the ungodly people, they're not experiencing the closeness with God like the others are, right? So that there is that caveat to throw in there. So while he's heading down to go and seek out this marriage, he's making plans to go seek this marriage, what does he come across? A young lion, and what does he do with it? It says the Spirit of God comes upon him and he tears it apart like he would a young kid of the goats, a little kid, baby goat. And he doesn't tell his mom and dad about it. And there seems to be some reason why he doesn't want them to know that he did this, because if you notice, at one point he's near a vineyard doing this. Did you see that in the text? Then went Samson down and his father and his mother, verse 5, to Timnath, and he came to the vineyards. Anybody know what's in the vineyard? What's he not supposed to be around? So why did he not tell them that he just killed a lion in the vineyards? Because he knows they're going to say, do you not know what you're supposed to be? Right? Well, he kills a lot of people, so he's around a lot of death. He's just not supposed to be around it after it happens. So, yeah. Huh? He can take life, but he can't hang around them for a while after they're dead. He's done. I mean, he kills lots of them. You'll find out here in a little bit. No, not that. Okay, Judges 14:18 through to 15:8. Judges 14:18 through to 15:8. Now we're going to skip ahead. Let me give you some things that are going on. Samson arranges this marriage, obviously with mom and dad helping, reluctantly helping. And they're holding the 7-day feast that goes on. And during that time, he presents this riddle to the men of the city, and it really gave them trouble. And in the process of this riddle, he sets up sort of a bet. If you can't solve it, I get this, and if you solve it, you get this. And there's this bet that's made in the process, and the men know they can't solve the riddle. Well, what is the riddle? Well, the riddle is based on what happened with the lion, and when he came back to the lion, he saw a bunch of honeys in the carcass of a bunch of bees, in the carcass of the lion, making a nest and having honey in the nest. And he actually goes down. Here's where he violates his Nazirite vow again. Sticks his hand and he tastes the honey, and he out of the carcass of the lion. And so he makes this riddle up. Let me read it to you. Let me find it real quick that he reads to him. Oh, let's see. He said, now I'll put forth a riddle. This is verse number 12. If you can certainly declare it within me with 7 days of the feast and find it out, I will give you 30 sheets and 30 changes of garment. But if you cannot declare it me, then shall you give me 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. And they said unto him, put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. And he said unto them, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And he's referring to the lion. Out of the strong, out of the eater came forth food. Out of the creature that devours, food came out of it. That's what he's saying. And that's this riddle that comes up, and he says it. You got 7 days to solve it. We're getting down to the end of the 7 days. They haven't been able to solve it, so they go to who to get the answer? They go to Samson's wife-to-be. And they pressure her and basically say, we will kill you if you don't give us the answer. We'll come after you. You say, why are they making such a big deal? Do you know how much money clothing is in that day? Do you know they said the average person in days of Jesus' time, in the days of Jesus' time, the average person had only 1 or 2 garments. And all their wealth was sewn up into those 1 or 2 garments. Sometimes literally sewn into it. Sometimes they sewed their own valuables into their own garments. But they are extremely valuable. He said, I'll give you 30, you give me 30, depending on who solves the riddle. I mean, if you're able to solve the riddle. They're coming down to the last, and that's a lot of money. They're coming down to the last day, and they finally pressure Samson's would-be wife to give the answer, and this is where the text takes us. So let's go ahead and read it up to that point. Let's look at verse 18 of chapter 14 down to 15, verse 8. So 18, let's do 18 down to 20. I'll do those 3 verses. Have Wayne do those. And let's have 1 to 5 of 15. Esther, and then let me get those last 3, 6, 7, and 8 done. David. Yep, 18 down to 20. And then Esther does the 1 to 5, and then David does the 6 to 8. That's a slang way to talk about this wife. Plowed with my heifer. Yeah, it's a derogatory term, okay? It's not a nice term. All right, go ahead. How would you like that to happen in your corn? Okay. All right, next. 6, 7, 8 of 15.
Then the Philistines said, Who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. And Samson said unto them, Though ye have done this, yet will I avenge of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and went down and dwelt in the top of the rock.
Yeah. Okay, so let's work through this one here. What power did Samson get to to go get the 30 Philistines' garments. What does it say? Yeah, the Lord comes upon him again, and he goes off to some other town and kills 30 Philistines and brings back their garments and says, here you go, to pay the debt. So God is working through this guy's decision, who basically lost a bet, and he's killing all these Philistines off to pay his debt off to him. Now we're not done, because when he gets back, what happens? What does he find out? His wife's been given to his companion, to basically like his best man or something, because it was assumed that he wasn't there because he was off killing Philistines, that he had left her and doesn't want her at the end of the feast, basically, at the end of the marriage feast. And so there's this assumption that she's not wanted, and so this guy gives his daughter to another to wife, and he doesn't even show up for a while after that, because it says he waits for a while before he even comes back to come and see her. And so there's even more reason that the father thinks he has basically left her and doesn't want her. And so when he finds out that happened, what does he do to show his anger? Yeah, and by the way, when we see the word corn in the Bible, it's not referring to maize. You know, the kind of stuff we grow here in Iowa. Corn is just a word that's used to describe a grain, okay? You'll see something, the Bible says it in the New Testament, a corn of wheat. It's just basically a grain is what it means, a grain of wheat. And so it's referring to probably wheat or barley or something of that nature here. So he's able somehow to catch a bunch of foxes, probably not he alone. He probably had some other people that helped him catch him. He catches them, and then he goes for this fun little trip of tying their tails together, putting a firebrand between their tails with it tied together, setting each tail on fire or firebrand on fire, and lets him go, running off into the fields all throughout the area. That's this man. And so what do? What do the Philistines do when they find out it was Samson that did this to their cornfields? They went after who? His wife and her father. It says they burned them. Burn him means they died. Yeah. So he says, I will be avenged. That's his whole life. I will be avenged. And so what does he do? Look what it tells us in the text. He smote them, I like this phrase, hip and thigh with a great slaughter. I'm not exactly sure what hip and thigh was. I looked that up to try to figure that out. But it's just a euphemism that means a thorough thrashing. He destroyed them thoroughly. And it says, and he did that, a great slaughter all throughout that area. So here's how God worked the entire time. God worked through a bad decision to marry an ungodly woman. God worked through his disobedience to going down into the vineyard, because that kind of played into the riddle thing. God worked through a disobedient wife to be, or fully to be, wife who basically turned on her own husband. God worked through that to bring about a bet that didn't work out on his favor, to accomplish what he wants to. And then God used that to provoke the anger of Samson to go and burn up the fields. And then God used that to smite more people. I mean, it's just like every bit of this. It says, if we go back again to the original text, it says he did this so that he could have an occasion against the Philistines. Every bit of this that happened was all so he could smite the Philistines. That's what God's intending to do. And he's going to use all this anger. He's going to use this backstabbing. He's going to use this disobeying a vow. All of it to accomplish his purpose. So if that's how God can work, then that tells us that there's nothing that God can't do to accomplish his purposes, right? All right. I thought maybe you'd be more excited than that. So The world doesn't have to be working perfectly for God to be working, right? You understand that? I mean, the world can be as depraved as it is in this day, in the days of the Philistines or the days of the judges, and you can still see God working. He's not limited. All the garbage happening around it. You know, someone said it like this: He's like the sunbeam that hits the garbage. So the garbage will never defile the sunbeam. It just reveals the garbage, right? But He's working in the midst of it all. All right, let's move on. Judges 16. And we're going to see where he's introduced to another woman, one of the most famous of women in the Bible. Anybody got an idea who this might be? Delilah. All right. Look at verse 4 to 6. Who wants to read that for us? Bill. Okay, let me step back for a minute because I skipped over something. In the back part, after this is done, he ends up going to a place in Judah where the people of Judah take him captive because the Philistines come out and they basically are demanding release Samson. And they take him captive, send him out, and he's all bound with these ropes. And it says in chapter 15 that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and the ropes basically melted off of him, broke them apart, and he smote them, destroyed all of these Philistines that were thinking they caught their warrior, caught the one they wanted to take out. So here's another chance that's happening again now in chapter 16, where he meets Delilah, and the Philistines, like with the first woman, get their hands in the middle of this thing, and they try to convince her to basically find out where his secret of strength is. Now, something to be noted about this. When we think of, a lot of people think of Samson, they think of him looking like an Arnold Schwarzenegger with muscles all over. The fact that they're saying what they're saying means they don't understand where the strength's coming from. He's probably not big and bulky, but he sure demonstrates it from time to time. Yes. Yes, killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass. How would you like that one? Yeah. Now, yeah, that's who should have been fighting the Midianites, right? He would have taken them all down. Okay, so we get this idea. This guy is a mighty man, and the Philistines can't figure him out. He's a puzzle. How in the world is he able to do this? At one point, there's another point where it says he picked up the city wall gates and carried them on his back like 20 miles away in the middle of the night. And they didn't know how he even did it. We talk about Solomon being the wisest man. This man was the strongest man, and they don't even know where the strength's coming from. I mean, we know where it's coming from, but nobody else seems to know where it's coming from. And like I said, it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger's strength. It's strength that's supernatural that just comes upon him suddenly. It's like, get away from this guy. Leave this guy alone. Yeah. So once again, here's the Lord working behind the scenes. He goes after this woman that is not the best woman in the Bible, Delilah. And basically her plan is to figure out his weakness. What has to happen for his strength to be taken from him? Okay? So she basically continues to come after him, and then finally she figures it out. It tells us in Judges chapter 16 that she has come to him 3 different times begging the source of his strength. And he keeps telling her, if you tie me up with this thing, or you do this to me, all these kinds of things, then my strength will be gone from me. And then I will be defeated. And you know the sad thing is, he let her do it to him. I mean, he let her tie him up in the things that he's saying. The Philistines are upon you, Samson. I mean, I can understand one time, sort of. But why would you do it 3 times? The guy's an idiot. I guess he's a jokester, maybe. But you know what? Every time, here's God working through this. Every time that happened, he dissolves the cords, he dissolves the ropes, he dissolves whatever it is he's tied up in. The braids, he's tied up at one point, his hair's tied up in these braids. He dissolves it all, and he defeats more Philistines every time. And it's like the Lord continually keeps working through this man in all the ways you would never think God would work to defeat an enemy. So finally, it tells us in the text that his soul was vexed to death of her continually asking, you keep lying to me, you keep telling me this is how it's going to work, and all this kind of stuff. And finally, he tells her, you cut my hair. I've been a Nazirite from birth. You cut my hair, then my strength will never come back, or my strength will be gone. So she puts him to sleep, and what does she do? Shaves his head while he's asleep. And then she yells, Samson, Samson, the Philistines be upon thee. Now let's look at the text. Go to Judges 16, 18 to 31. And we're going to see what happens. Let's have 18 to 25. Who wants to do that? Bill. And then let's do 26 to 31. Who wants to do that? Darla. Okay. Okay, so This comes down to the end here, but Samson, a famous line there in the text, says he did not know what? That the Lord had departed from him. I mean, that's a thought to think of. He was basically so used to living this way that the Lord would come upon him suddenly and he would show his might and power and defeat his enemies. And he's been doing it over and over and over and over, and nobody seems to catch him. And then suddenly, because he revealed his secret, now the Lord had departed from him. Now, hold on for a moment just to think for a second here. Is it the hair that gives him his power? No. It's not the hair that gives him his power. What gives him the power? God. But really, it was sort of like he had finally come to the very last step of disobeying his vow. He had disobeyed it continually, hasn't he? And we'll look at it in just a moment. He's just one thing after another, continues to disobey the vow that he had made, or that was made for him, I guess you'd say. And finally, he does the last thing to show his basically utter disdain for his vow, and he gives up the secret, if you will, and it cost him. And they take him. But once again, God is working through even this. Because what ends up happening, he's taken as a sort of as a slave, where it says they use him for grinding. What's that mean? It means they used him like an animal, where he pulled a grinding wheel and grinded, wheat and whatever other things they would have used or had. And while he's going through this, he's got his eyes gouged out because they've blinded him now. At one point, his hair starts to grow back. And they decide they're going to have a party, a feast unto their God, and they're going to make mock of Samson while they're there in the temple of Dagon. And whatever that means that they were doing, making sport with Samson, you know what that could have been, any kind of mockery they were using him for. He prays. And what does he ask the Lord to do? First, to remember him. Remember him. That's sort of a way of saying, God, I know I was in the wrong, but please remember me one more time. Then let me be avenged, which that kind of sounds selfish, doesn't it? Just for his eyes. But then finally, the last part is that he was willing to die to solve the last part. And so what does he end up doing? He goes to the two pillars that he's been directed to by one of the other servant children, and he pushes down the two pillars, and it says, and all the people in the house, it said there were more people in that house that died than all his exploits through the years of his judging Israel. For 20 years, it's been going on. For 20 years, he's been dealing with the Philistines, and finally in that last bit, he slays more in that time than he does in all the years before that. Yeah. So God is using a very strange person to do his work, to continually to preserve his people. See, had they done what they were supposed to, and I go, this is always hindsight is 20/20, had they done what they were supposed to back in the days of Joshua, where they got rid of all of these people out of the land like God told them, they would never have been dealing with this continually all the way through the book of Judges. For nearly 400 years, they deal with it. I'm not going to tell you the message's sermon yet, because I'm going to deal with this point, but this doesn't even go on and end at the end of the time of the Judges. Having these nations just goes on all through their history, that they never dealt with it fully. And it just continually served to be a thorn in their side. Yes? I don't know. I imagine they were probably taken in the Assyrian captivity, probably, or Babylonian captivity might have finally finished them off once and for all. There's a lot of those Philistines or ites that you see mentioned in the Bible that they're not existent anymore. Somewhere down the line, they either merged with another nation or they just went out of existence through battles or whatever. Yeah. No, there were different groups. You read through the time of the judges, you had the Moabites were at one point. That was what we talked about last time, right? And so there's this, every once in a while, there's these new groups that come on and they kind of dominate the people of Israel, but they're always there. It's just some become more powerful for a time and they become the enemies to the people of Israel during that time. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let me finish this off with, I'll give this to you only so you can work on it on your own, just because our time is short. But I'm going to show you some of his failings in the Nazirite vows, if you want to go past that down. And then we're going to kind of come to a conclusion about how God can use basically anybody, even a Samson. Now, this is called Samson's failings here. And it says there in Judges 14:1, it talks about how that the Bible actually said that the people of Israel were only to marry people within their line, right, within their nation. They weren't to marry foreign nations lest they have their hearts turned away from the Lord and they're led into idolatry. But does Samson violate that responsibility as an Israelite? Yes, he does. And that's the one there you see in the Judges 14:1 of the Samson's failings. And again, you can look at this on your own here. Judges 14:8 and 9. As a Nazirite, Samson should not have touched a carcass of an unclean animal, and especially eat food out of it. That is a violation of the Nazirite vow, right? And he did. He violated that. He broke that vow. Then we get to Judges 16, which we didn't really cover it, but it mentions in Judges 16 that he saw a harlot there and he went in unto her, which you can assume that's not probably something God would want him to be doing. Sexual sin was something that they weren't supposed to do as a nation, as people, and yet he did it. He violated that, and that was just a standard for the nation of Israel. Judges 16:10, if you go on, it talks about how Samson repeatedly lies to Delilah about his great source of strength. Well, I don't know. So it says, is it okay to lie to her? Well, he probably shouldn't even been connected to her. Let's just say it that way. But you go down one path, you just keep going down, right? And getting worse and worse and worse. And he was not a man of truth. So you see that happening. So let's go to those three questions, and we'll be done with them by those three questions. They're in that Samson's failing. Number one, Hebrews 11:32 through 38, it gives a description of the heroes of faith. Anybody want to look at that and read that real quick for us? Hebrews chapter 11. Can you guess who's going to be mentioned in there? Who's going to be mentioned in there? We've had a few people that are going to be mentioned. Go ahead and read it for us. Yeah, just stop right there. That's okay. Out of those verses that we've read up to this point, what would you say describes Samson in there? Huh? Mighty fighter? Stop the mouth of lions? That could be. I would think that fits Daniel, but we could put that in there because he did deal with a lion. Okay. Escape the edge of the sword. Out of weakness made strong. What about the bonds and imprisonment? Yeah, he was in that. The trial of cruel mockings. We read that a little bit. That might fit some of him. And he's called a hero of the faith. Now, have we read anything that sounds like somebody who's a hero of the faith in the Bible? Up to this point about this guy. Have we read anything that sounds like that? That would be about the last part, I would say. Yeah. But the man, for the most part, we would deem as Not a hero of the faith, a hero of Satan, basically, but sort of God uses them. Okay, number 2. How is it that Samson can be seen as a model of faith if he was so disobedient to God in these instances? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I think what Fred did say at the end there, the last thing you said about his last point was probably the most bit of faith we've seen in all his action. It was sort of a repentant type of faith, but even he was used and qualified in the great heroes of faith, the hall of faith in Hebrews 11. He's one that gets listed that God would use. And I think that it's funny because if you go and read in the hall of faith, there's some others in there that I would think, how in the world do they get in there either? He's not the only one that I think shouldn't be in there, at least doesn't have a lot of great qualities to be in there. Yes. Philistines would have kept him down, yeah. You know what it does tell us about that time? I mean, it just tells us that God was using the people he could use. You know, I mean, he can use anybody, but it just kind of gives you the nature of people at that point. There wasn't a lot of godly people in the days of the judges. There were a bunch of very carnal, selfish, sinful people. They were all doing that which is right in their own eyes. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, the only thing that separated Samson from the rest for the most part was God had separated him. Yeah. And God had decided to use him. It sounds like possibly that his parents had some godliness to him. I mean, the fact that they tried to tell him, don't be going around those women, but he wouldn't listen. And they wanted to honor God, and they were willing to obey that prophet that told them what to do. So it sounded like they had some bit of a sympathy, at least, or maybe a heart for God, and maybe they had trained their boy to be a godly man, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll turn out that way, does it? Children still can go their own way. Yep. All right, last one. How does your answer to the question above help you understand your role as a servant of God? If God could use a Samson, he surely could use a Wayne, right? He could surely use a Fred, surely use a David. He could surely use any of us, right? Okay. All right. Yeah. 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 You know what the book of Judges kind of connects me to the time of our time is that the big lie, I think, of humanity today, and it's worldwide. It's not just in one part of the world, is the lie that we're basically a product of random chance, evolution, time, that there was no God, that we all. And what's really sad is you hear that meme or that idea in everything. It's in movies, it's in the news, and it's just automatically accepted as fact. Though there's really, the proof is far from proof. And it's there. I mean, if you've done the study, you'll know it's just something that's said. And yet you have people that are believers that try to blend the two together, blend our relationship with God and that together, which they're contrary to each other. And it's going on all the time. You hear about it all the time. that's exactly what was going on in the nation of Israel, not the evolutionary thing, but it was just the paganism of the culture, and they were blending it with their faith in God. And so they had their view of God, yet at the same time, it was tainted, it was corrupted, and yet God still worked through that. What an amazing thing. Now, I'll just say this, I don't want to be that way. I want to be all that God wants me to be. I don't want to be tainted. I don't want to be corrupted. I want to be what God wants me to be. I want to believe what He wants me to believe, and I want to be used the way I could be used, in a way that pleases Him. Right? It was a different way. They dumped idolatry, but they basically turned to self-righteousness, which is the extreme other ditch. You have one is paganism, the other is becoming, basically saying, I'm good enough that I don't need God either way. So it's a deadly, you got to make sure you're down the middle, not in the ditch on either side, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. We're past our time, but it's good to talk, and I hope this is helpful to you to at least remind you that God can use you. Okay? Wayne, will you close us in prayer for this morning? And then we got some breakfast. Anybody wants some over there in the kitchen? We'll come back at 15 after.